On his way to a meeting, a millionaire gets into a cab and starts sweating nervously at the sight of the driver's tattoo. What seemed like mere coincidence soon turns out to be a connection to his past. The sleek black Mercedes glided through the bustling streets of downtown, its polished exterior reflecting the morning sun. Inside, Alexander Blackwood sat rigidly in the back seat, his piercing blue eyes fixed on the tablet in his hands. At 50, he was the epitome of success. CEO of Blackwood Transportation, one of the largest logistics companies in the region. His salt and pepper hair was immaculately styled, and his tailored suit spoke of wealth and influence. As the car maneuvered through traffic, Alexander's mind raced with thoughts of the impending meeting. Today's presentation to potential investors could propel Blackwood Transportation to new heights, expanding their reach across the country. He had spent weeks preparing, fine-tuning every detail. Nothing could go wrong. Nothing would go wrong. The car suddenly lurched, jerking Alexander from his thoughts. A plume of smoke billowed from under the hood, and the engine sputtered to a stop. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm terribly sorry," his driver, James, said, his voice tinged with panic. "It seems we're having some engine trouble." Alexander's jaw clenched. He glanced at his watch. 8:45 a.m. The meeting was at 9:30. "How long will it take to fix?" James stepped out of the car, popping the hood. After a moment, he returned, his face grim. "I'm afraid it's not a quick fix, sir. We'll need a tow truck." Alexander felt a surge of anger, quickly suppressed. Anger wouldn't solve this. He needed solutions. "Call a taxi immediately," he ordered, gathering his briefcase and tablet. As James made the call, Alexander stood on the sidewalk, his impatience growing with each passing second. He could feel curious glances from passers-by, no doubt wondering why such a well-dressed man was standing next to a smoking luxury car. Finally, a yellow taxi pulled up. Alexander didn't wait for James to open the door. He yanked it open himself, sliding into the back seat. "Downtown Financial District and step on it," he barked, not bothering to look at the driver. "I'll make it worth your while if you get me there by 9:20. "You got it, boss," came a surprisingly feminine voice from the front seat. Alexander blinked, finally looking up. The driver was a young woman, probably in her late 20s. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore a faded denim jacket over a simple white t-shirt. As she pulled away from the curb, merging into traffic with surprising skill, Alexander found himself staring at her hands on the wheel. There, on her right wrist, was a tattoo, a rose with thorns, its petals a deep, vibrant red. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Alexander felt his heart rate spike, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. That tattoo, it was impossible. It couldn't be. And yet, the rose was identical to one he hadn't seen in nearly 3 decades, the one that had adorned the wrist of Eleanor, the woman who had captured his heart in his youth, the one who had disappeared without a trace, leaving only a terse goodbye note. "You okay back there?" The driver's voice cut through his shock. "You're looking a little pale." Alexander realized he had been staring. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "I'm fine," he managed, his voice hoarse. "Just worried about being late." The driver grinned in the rearview mirror. "Don't you worry. I know all the shortcuts. We'll get you there in no time." Alexander nodded absently, his mind reeling. He couldn't take his eyes off that tattoo. Every time the driver's hands moved on the wheel, the rose seemed to dance, bringing with it a flood of memories he had long suppressed. Eleanor's laugh, bright and carefree, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the feel of her hand in his as they walked along the beach, the plans they had made, the dreams they had shared, and then the gut-wrenching pain of her sudden departure. He had never understood why she left. One day they were planning their future, and the next, she was gone. The note she left behind had been brief and cold, so unlike her. It had simply said that she needed to move on, that their worlds were too different. He had searched for her, of course, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air. Now, decades later, here was this young woman with the exact same tattoo. It couldn't be a coincidence. But what did it mean? "That's an interesting tattoo," Alexander found himself saying, his curiosity overriding his usual reserved demeanor. The driver glanced at her wrist, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Oh, this? Yeah, it's pretty special to me. It's the same one my mom had." Alexander felt his breath catch. "Your mother?" "Yep. She always said it represented strength and freedom, That no matter how delicate something might seem, it can still have thorns, you know? Alexander nodded, his mind racing. Could it be possible? The timing would be right, but surely... No, he couldn't allow himself to go down that path. It was too fantastical, too painful to consider. Did your mother get the tattoo when she was young? He asked, trying to keep his voice casual. The driver shrugged. I think so. She doesn't talk about it much. Actually, she doesn't talk much about her past at all. But hey, we all have our secrets, right? Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to ask more, to demand answers to questions he wasn't even sure how to formulate. But before he could say anything else, the taxi came to a smooth stop. Here we are, boss. Downtown financial district with... She glanced at the clock. 5 minutes to spare. Told you I knew the shortcuts? Alexander blinked, realizing they had indeed arrived at his destination. He had been so lost in thought, so caught up in the whirlwind of memories and possibilities, that he had lost track of time entirely. He pulled out his wallet, handing over far more cash than the fare required. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't quite hide. You've been more helpful than you know. As he stepped out of the taxi, a sudden impulse seized him. He turned back, pulling a business card from his pocket. If you need anything, or just want to talk, please call me. The driver took the card, her eyebrows raised in surprise. Sure. Thanks, I guess. Alexander nodded, then turned and strode towards the gleaming office building. But his mind was far from the upcoming meeting. It was lost in the past, grappling with possibilities he had never dared to consider. As he rode the elevator to the top floor, he tried to focus on the presentation, on the future of his company. But all he could see was that rose tattoo, blooming with questions he wasn't sure he was ready to answer. The sleek elevator ascended silently, carrying Alexander Blackwood towards the pinnacle of the towering skyscraper. His reflection in the polished doors stared back at him, a man outwardly composed but inwardly reeling. The business card he had impulsively given to the taxi driver felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket, a tangible reminder of the strange encounter that had shaken his carefully constructed world. As the elevator dinged, announcing his arrival at the top floor, Alexander took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. He had an empire to expand, investors to impress. He couldn't afford to be distracted by ghosts from the past, no matter how vividly they had suddenly reappeared. The conference room was already filled with potential investors when Alexander strode in, his game face firmly in place. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and confident. "Thank you for joining us today. Blackwood Transportation stands on the cusp of a new era, and I'm excited to share our vision for the future with you." For the next hour, Alexander was the epitome of the successful businessman. He presented growth projections, outlined expansion plans, and fielded questions with ease. On the surface, he was unflappable, charismatic, entirely in control. But beneath the polished exterior, his mind kept drifting back to the taxi ride. The rose tattoo danced at the edges of his vision, a constant reminder of unresolved questions and long-buried emotions. As the meeting concluded, handshakes were exchanged, and promises of follow-up discussions were made. Alexander maintained his professional demeanor, but he felt a sense of relief when the last investor filed out of the room. Alone at last, he sank into one of the plush leather chairs, loosening his tie. The adrenaline of the presentation was wearing off, leaving him feeling drained and oddly vulnerable. "You okay, boss?" The voice of his assistant, Sarah, startled him. She stood in the doorway, a concerned look on her face. "You seemed a little off during the Q&A session. Not that anyone else would notice, but..." Alexander managed a weak smile. Sarah had been with him for over a decade, and she knew him better than most. "I'm fine," he lied, straightening up. "Just a bit of car trouble this morning. Nothing to worry about." Sarah's eyebrow arched skeptically, but she didn't press the issue. "Well, if you say so. Your next meeting isn't until 2 p.m. Want me to order lunch?" "No, thank you," Alexander replied, standing up. "I think I'll take a walk, clear my head a bit." Sarah nodded, still looking concerned, but retreated from the doorway. Alexander gathered his things and headed for the elevator once more. Outside, the bustling city streets were a stark contrast to the quiet intensity of the boardroom. Alexander walked aimlessly, barely noticing the crowds that parted around him. His mind was decades away, lost in memories he had long tried to suppress. He found himself in a small park, sitting on a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree. From his pocket, he pulled out his phone, staring at the screen for a long moment before opening his contacts. There, under E, was a number he had never been able to delete, even after all these years. Elena. His thumb hovered over the name, trembling slightly. What would he even say if he called? "Hello, remember me? The man you left without explanation nearly 30 years ago. I think I just met our daughter." The thought was absurd. And yet, the similarities were too striking to ignore. The rose tattoo, the timing, the driver's offhand comment about her mother not talking about her past. Alexander closed his eyes, leaning back on the bench. He could still remember the day Elena got that tattoo. They had been young and in love, full of dreams and defiance. Elena had designed the rose herself, saying it represented their love. Beautiful, but with the strength to withstand any hardship. How naive they had been. The memory of their last night together surfaced unbidden. They had been planning their future, talking about marriage, children, the life they would build together. Elena had been radiant, her eyes shining with love and excitement. There had been no hint, no warning of the storm that was about to shatter their world. And then, she was gone. The note she left behind had been brief and cold, so at odds with the warmth and passion that had defined their relationship. Alexander had been devastated, unable to understand what had gone wrong. He had searched for her, of course, but it was as if Eleanor had vanished into thin air. Eventually, he had been forced to accept that she didn't want to be found. Life had gone on. He had thrown himself into his work, building Blackwood Transportation from the ground up. He had married, had children, achieved all the markers of success. But there had always been a part of him that wondered, that ached for answers. Now, decades later, those questions were resurging with a vengeance. If the taxi driver was indeed Elena's daughter, their daughter, what did that mean? Why had Elena kept her existence a secret? And more importantly, what was he going to do about it? Alexander opened his eyes, realizing that the afternoon had slipped away while he was lost in thought. He stood up, brushing off his suit, and began the walk back to his office. With each step, a resolve began to form. He couldn't ignore this. Whatever the truth was, he needed to know. He owed it to himself, to the young man he had been, so full of love and hope. And if there was even a chance that the driver was his daughter, he owed it to her too. Back in his office, Alexander called for Sarah. She appeared promptly, notepad in hand. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood. I need you to do something for me," he said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of intensity. "There was a taxi driver this morning, a young woman. I gave her my card. I need you to find out who she is, where she works, everything you can about her and her family." Sarah's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but she quickly schooled her expression back to professional neutrality. "Of course, sir. Any particular reason?" Alexander paused, considering how much to reveal. "It's a personal matter," he said finally. "Very personal and very important. I need this handled with the utmost discretion." Sarah nodded, her curiosity evident but held in check by years of professional decorum. "I understand, sir. I'll get right on it." As Sarah left the office, Alexander turned to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled before him, a testament to all he had achieved. But for the first time in years, he found himself wondering about the road not taken, the life he might have had. Whatever Sarah's investigation revealed, Alexander knew his life was about to change. The careful walls he had built around his emotions were crumbling, and he wasn't sure if he was more terrified or exhilarated by the prospect. One thing was certain: he couldn't go back to the way things were. The rose tattoo had bloomed in his life once more, and this time he was determined to uncover the truth it had been hiding all these years. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Alexander Blackwood stood at the precipice of a new chapter in his life. The successful businessman, the distant husband and father, the man who had spent decades running from his past, all of these identities were about to be challenged. And somewhere in the city, a young taxi driver was going about her day, unaware that her world was about to be turned upside down by a chance encounter and a long-buried secret. The following days passed in a blur for Alexander Blackwood. On the surface, life continued as usual. Meetings were attended, decisions were made, and the wheels of Blackwood transportation kept turning. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, Alexander's world was in turmoil. Every morning he found himself scanning the streets, hoping to catch a glimpse of that yellow taxi. Every young woman with dark hair made his heart skip a beat. The rose tattoo haunted his dreams, blooming and withering in an endless cycle. At home, the tension was palpable. His wife, Victoria, noticed the change in him immediately. "Alex, what's going on with you?" she asked one evening, as they sat in their expansive living room, the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You've been distracted all week." Alexander sipped his scotch, buying time. How could he explain the storm raging inside him? How could he tell her about Elena, about the taxi driver, about the possibility that had upended his carefully constructed life? "It's just work," he lied, hating himself for the deception. "A potential new investor. It could change everything for the company." Victoria's perfectly manicured eyebrow arched skeptically. After 20 years of marriage, she knew when he wasn't being entirely truthful, but she also knew when not to push. "Well, don't let it consume you," she said, rising gracefully from her chair. "Remember, we have the charity gala next week. I need you present for that at least." Alexander nodded, grateful for the reprieve. As Victoria left the room, he felt the weight of his secrets pressing down on him. He loved his wife in his own way. She was intelligent, sophisticated, the perfect partner for a man of his status. But their relationship had always been more of a partnership than a passionate love affair. He had never told her about Elena, about the depth of what he had lost all those years ago. Now faced with the possibility of a daughter he never knew existed, Alexander felt the foundations of his life shifting. He wasn't just risking his own emotional stability. He was potentially upending the lives of his wife and their 2 children, Thomas and Emma. The next morning, Sarah cornered him as soon as he stepped into his office. "Mr. Blackwood, I have the information you requested," she said, her voice low even though they were alone. She handed him a slim folder, her eyes searching his face for any clue about the importance of its contents. Alexander took the folder with a nod of thanks, his heart racing. "Clear my schedule for the next hour, please," he said, his voice remarkably steady given the turmoil inside him. As soon as Sarah left, closing the door behind her, Alexander opened the folder with trembling hands. There, staring up at him, was a photo of the taxi driver, Olivia Martinez, age 28, born and raised in the city, and her mother's name, Elena Rodriguez. Alexander felt the air leave his lungs in a rush. It was true, all of it. The timing, the resemblance. There was no doubt in his mind. Olivia was his daughter. The report went on, detailing Olivia's life. She had graduated from the local community college with a degree in business, but had been working as a taxi driver to support herself and her mother. Elena, it seemed, had been unwell for several years. Alexander leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling. He had a daughter, a grown woman with a life of her own, who had no idea who he was. And Elena, the woman he had loved so deeply, who had disappeared without a trace, had been here in the city all along, raising their child alone. The questions that had plagued him for days now multiplied. Why had Elena left? Why had she kept Olivia a secret? And what was he going to do with this information? His first instinct was to rush out, to find Olivia and Eleanor, to demand answers and explanations. But as the initial shock wore off, caution set in. This wasn't just about him anymore. His actions would have consequences for Olivia, for Eleanor, for his entire family. Alexander spent the next hour poring over the report, absorbing every detail of the life his daughter had lived without him. He learned that she volunteered at a local animal shelter, that she had a passion for photography, that she had worked multiple jobs to put herself through college. Pride swelled in his chest, mingling with a deep sense of loss for all the years he had missed. As the day wore on, Alexander found it increasingly difficult to focus on work. His mind kept drifting to Olivia, imagining the conversations they might have, the relationship they might build. But with each daydream came a stab of guilt. Guilt for the family he already had, for the lies he would have to tell, for the pain this revelation might cause. That evening, as he rode the elevator down to the parking garage, Alexander made a decision. He couldn't rush into this. He needed to approach the situation carefully, to consider all the implications before making any moves. But he also knew he couldn't ignore it. The taxi ride had cracked open a door to his past, and there was no closing it now. He had to find a way forward, a way to reconcile the life he had built with the one he had lost. As he drove home through the crowded city streets, Alexander found himself looking at every passing taxi, wondering if Olivia was behind the wheel. The city that had been his kingdom for so long suddenly felt different, full of secrets and possibilities he had never considered. At a red light, he noticed a young couple on the sidewalk. They were laughing, their arms around each other, lost in their own world. For a moment he saw himself and Elena, young and in love, before life had torn them apart. The light turned green, and Alexander drove on. But something had shifted inside him. The carefully constructed walls he had built around his heart were crumbling, and in their place, a determination was growing. He would find a way to connect with Olivia. He would uncover the truth about what had happened with Eleanor, and somehow he would find a way to bring these two halves of his life together without destroying everything he had built. As he pulled into his driveway, the sprawling mansion looming before him, Alexander took a deep breath. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he would take the first step on this new, uncertain path. Little did he know that fate had other plans, and the carefully controlled narrative he was trying to construct was about to spin wildly out of his control. The morning dawned crisp and clear, the sun's rays painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. For Olivia Martinez, it was just another day, another shift behind the wheel of her taxi. She yawned as she slid into the driver's seat, her muscles protesting after a late night at the animal shelter. As she navigated the morning traffic, her mind wandered to the strange encounter from a few days ago. The well-dressed businessman who had seemed so shaken by her tattoo, who had given her his card with an intensity that still puzzled her. She had tucked the card away in her wallet, unsure what to make of it. Probably just another rich guy with a midlife crisis, she muttered to herself, shaking off the memory. She had more important things to worry about, like how she was going to pay for her mother's latest round of medical tests. Across town, Alexander Blackwood was already at his desk, his normally impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. He had barely slept, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. The file on Olivia lay open before him, her photo staring up at him accusingly. He reached for his phone, his finger hovering over the number for the taxi company where Olivia worked. One call, and he could find out her schedule, arrange another chance encounter. But something held him back. Was this really the right way to approach the situation? Before he could make a decision, his office door burst open. Thomas, his 18-year-old son, stormed in, his face flushed with anger. "Dad, what the hell?" Thomas brandished his phone, a news article displayed on the screen. "Why am I finding out about this from social media?" Alexander felt his stomach drop. "Finding out about what?" he asked, even as he reached for his own phone, dreading what he might see. Thomas thrust the phone at him. The headline screamed, "Blackwood Air Scandal Secret Love Child Revealed?" The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Alexander scanned the article. Someone had leaked information about Olivia, spinning a salacious tale of a long-lost daughter and a potential shake-up in the Blackwood Empire. The article was light on facts but heavy on speculation, hinting at family drama and corporate intrigue. "Is it true?" Thomas demanded, his voice cracking. "Do I have a sister I never knew about?" Alexander closed his eyes, feeling the carefully constructed plan he had been forming crumble to dust. "Thomas, it's complicated," he began, but his son cut him off. "Complicated? That's all you have to say? God, Dad, how could you do this to us?" "To Mom." Before Alexander could respond, his phone began to ring. Victoria's name flashed on the screen, and he could only imagine the conversation that awaited him. But before he could answer, Sarah burst into the office, her usual composure shattered. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "The press is downstairs, and the board is demanding an emergency meeting. What do you want me to do?" Alexander felt as if he were standing on the edge of a precipice, the ground crumbling beneath his feet. Everything he had worked so hard to build, the careful balance he had maintained for years, was threatening to come crashing down around him. But even as panic threatened to overwhelm him, a part of Alexander felt an odd sense of relief. The secret was out now. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. Whatever happened next, he would face it head on. "Sarah, tell the board I'll meet with them in an hour," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "And call our PR team. We need to get ahead of this story." As Sarah nodded and retreated, Alexander turned to his son. Thomas stood rigid, his face a mask of hurt and betrayal. "I know you have questions," Alexander said softly, "and I promise I'll answer them all. But right now, I need to deal with this. Can we talk later?" Thomas stared at him for a long moment, then gave a curt nod before storming out of the office. As the door slammed behind him, Alexander allowed himself a moment of grief for the relationship that might never be the same. His phone buzzed again, Victoria calling for the third time. With a deep breath, Alexander answered. "Victoria, I can explain." "Save it, Alexander." His wife's voice was cold, controlled. "I don't want to hear your explanations over the phone. We'll discuss this at home. For now, do what you need to do to contain this mess." The line went dead before he could respond. Alexander stared at the phone, feeling the weight of his choices pressing down on him. He had known this revelation would cause pain, but he hadn't anticipated it exploding into public view like this. As he gathered his thoughts, preparing for the board meeting and the media frenzy that awaited him, Alexander's mind turned to Olivia. Did she know yet? How was she handling this sudden intrusion into her life? Across the city, Olivia's day was taking its own unexpected turn. She had just dropped off a passenger when her phone exploded with notifications. Messages from friends, missed calls from her mother, and a flurry of social media alerts. Puzzled, she pulled over to the side of the road and opened the first message. It was from her best friend, Jess. "OMG, Liv, is it true? Are you really the secret daughter of Alexander Blackwood? Call me ASAP." Olivia felt as if the ground had dropped out from under her. She clicked on one of the news links, her heart pounding as she read the article. Her name was there, along with details about her life that she had never shared publicly. And there, in the center of it all, was a photo of Alexander Blackwood, the man from the taxi, the man who had seemed so shaken by her tattoo. As the implications began to sink in, Olivia's phone rang. It was her mother. With trembling hands, Olivia answered the call. "Mom, what's going on? Is this true?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Elena finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Oh, Olivia, I'm so sorry. This isn't how I wanted you to find out. Can you come home? We need to talk." As Olivia pulled back into traffic, her mind reeling, she felt as if her entire world had been turned upside down. The man she had idly dreamed might be her father when she was a child, the nameless, faceless figure her mother had never spoken of, suddenly had a name, a face, and an empire, and now, for better or worse, their lives were irrevocably intertwined. Back in his office, Alexander straightened his tie and took a deep breath. The board was waiting, the press was clamoring, and somewhere out there, a young woman he had never truly known was about to become the center of a storm she hadn't asked for. As he stepped out to face the music, Alexander made a silent vow. Somehow he would make this right. For his family, for Olivia, and for the young man he had once been, full of love and hope for a future with Elena. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and the drama that had been brewing for nearly 3 decades was about to unfold in ways none of them could have anticipated. The Blackwood mansion, usually a bastion of calm and luxury, was in turmoil. Victoria Blackwood paced the length of the ornate living room, her Louboutin heels clicking against the marble floor. Her normally perfectly coiffed hair was slightly disheveled, and her eyes blazed with a mixture of anger and hurt. As the front door opened, she whirled around. Alexander stepped in, looking years older than he had that morning. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. "How could you?" Victoria finally broke the silence, her voice low and controlled. "All these years, Alexander, all these years, and you never thought to mention you had another child." Alexander sank into a nearby armchair, the weight of the day pressing down on him. "I didn't know," he said softly. "Victoria, you have to believe me. I had no idea until a few days ago." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "A few days ago, and you didn't think to tell me then?" "I was trying to figure out how to handle it," Alexander explained, running a hand through his hair. "I never meant for it to come out like this. I was going to tell you, I swear." "And what about Thomas and Emma?" Victoria demanded. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to them? Emma's locked herself in her room, and Thomas—" "God, Alexander, I've never seen him so angry." The mention of his children sent a fresh wave of guilt through Alexander. "Where are they? I need to talk to them. Explain what, Dad?" Thomas's voice cut through the room. He stood in the doorway, his face a mask of hurt and betrayal. "Explain how you've been lying to us our whole lives." Alexander stood, reaching out to his son. "Thomas, please, it's not what you think. I didn't know about Olivia until recently. I would never have kept something like that from you." Thomas took a step back, avoiding his father's touch. "But you kept it from us for the past few days, didn't you? You found out and you didn't say a word. And now everyone knows. Do you have any idea what it's like at school? The things people are saying?" "I'm sorry," Alexander said, his voice cracking. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I was trying to protect you, to figure out the best way to handle it." "Protect us?" Thomas scoffed. "By lying? By pretending everything was normal while you were investigating your secret daughter?" Victoria moved to stand beside Thomas, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We trusted you, Alexander," she said quietly. "We believed in the life we built together. And now I don't know what to believe." Alexander looked from his wife to his son, seeing the pain and disappointment in their eyes. He had always prided himself on being in control, on making the right decisions for his family and his company. But now, faced with the consequences of his actions, he felt utterly lost. "I love you both," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You and Emma, you're my world. I never meant to hurt you. Please, give me a chance to make this right." Thomas shook his head, turning away. "I need some air," he muttered, striding out of the room. Victoria watched him go, then turned back to Alexander. "I think you should sleep in the guest room tonight," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "We all need some time to process this." As Victoria left the room, Alexander sank back into the chair, feeling the full weight of his choices crashing down on him. The carefully constructed life he had built was crumbling around him, and he wasn't sure how to put it back together. Across town, in a modest apartment, another family drama was unfolding. Olivia sat on the worn couch, staring at her mother in disbelief. Elena Rodriguez, looking older and more fragile than Olivia had ever seen her, wrung her hands in her lap. "Why, Mum?" Olivia asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Why did you never tell me?" Elena sighed, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "I thought I was protecting you, mihija." Alexander, his world was so different from ours. His family would never have accepted me, accepted us. "But he's my father," Olivia insisted. "Didn't I have a right to know him? To have him in my life?" "It wasn't that simple," Elena said softly. "When I found out I was pregnant, I was so scared. Alexander's mother, she made it clear that I wasn't welcome in their world. She threatened to ruin my family if I didn't leave." Olivia's eyes widened in shock. "His mother did that? But why didn't you tell Alexander? Surely he would have stood up for you, for us." Eleanor shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "Oh, Olivia, you don't know how powerful the Blackwoods were, how much influence they had. Alexander was young, ambitious. I couldn't ask him to give up everything for me, and I was afraid that if I told him, he might choose his family over us. I couldn't bear the thought of you being rejected by your own father." "So you made the choice for him," Olivia said, a hint of accusation in her voice. "You decided he wouldn't want us, without even giving him a chance." "I know it was wrong," Eleanor admitted, reaching out to take her daughter's hand. "I've carried that guilt for years, but everything I did out of love for you. I wanted to give you a life free from all that drama, that pressure." Olivia pulled her hand away, standing up to pace the small living room. "And now that everyone knows, what are we supposed to do?" Eleanor watched her daughter, her heart breaking at the pain and confusion in Olivia's eyes. "I don't know, mi amor, but whatever happens, we'll face it together. Just like we always have." As Olivia turned to look out the window, her mind racing with questions and possibilities, her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "Olivia, this is Alexander Blackwood. We need to talk. Please give me a chance to explain. Name the time and place and I'll be there." Olivia stared at the message, her heart pounding. The father she had never known, the man who had been nothing more than a vague concept for her entire life, was now reaching out. Part of her wanted to ignore the message, to pretend none of this was happening, but a larger part, the part that had always wondered about her father, urged her to respond. With trembling fingers, she typed out a reply. "Tomorrow 2 p.m. The coffee shop on 5th and Main." As she hit send, Olivia felt as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff, about to take a leap into the unknown. Whatever happened tomorrow would change her life forever. Back at the Blackwood mansion, Alexander's phone buzzed with Olivia's response. As he read it, a mixture of relief and apprehension washed over him. This was his chance to make things right, to begin building a relationship with the daughter he had never known. But as he looked around the empty living room, the silence of his family's absence deafening, he wondered if it was already too late. Had his past finally caught up with him, destroying everything he held dear in the process? As night fell over the city, 4 people in 2 very different homes lay awake, their minds churning with questions, fears and hopes for what the new day would bring. The stage was set for a confrontation nearly 3 decades in the making, and none of them could predict how it would unfold. The coffee shop on 5th and Main was bustling with the afternoon crowd when Olivia pushed open the door. She scanned the room nervously, her heart pounding in her chest. She had arrived early, unable to sit still in her apartment any longer, but there was no sign of Alexander Blackwood yet. Choosing a table near the back, Olivia sat down, her fingers drumming an anxious rhythm on the worn wooden surface. She had agonized over what to wear, finally settling on a simple blouse and jeans. Part of her had wanted to dress up, to somehow prove that she could fit into Alexander's world. But in the end, she decided to come as herself. If he was going to be part of her life, he would have to accept her as she was. The bell above the door chimed, and Olivia's head snapped up. Alexander Blackwood walked in, looking somewhat out of place in his expensive suit. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. Alexander made his way to her table, his usual confident stride slightly hesitant. "Olivia," he said softly as he reached her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." Olivia nodded, gesturing for him to sit. An awkward silence fell between them as Alexander took his seat. Up close, Olivia could see the lines of stress etched on his face, the slight tremor in his hands as he placed them on the table. I'm not sure where to begin," Alexander admitted, his voice low. "There's so much to say, so much to explain." Olivia took a deep breath, steeling herself. "How about we start with the truth? Did you know about me? All these years, did you know I existed?" Alexander shook his head emphatically. "No, Olivia, I swear to you I had no idea. If I had known—" He trailed off, his eyes filled with regret. "If I had known, things would have been very different." "How can I believe you?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling slightly. "My whole life I wondered about you. I imagined all these scenarios about who my father might be, why he wasn't in my life. And now I find out you're this tycoon. How could you not have known?" Alexander leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Your mother, Elena, she disappeared without a trace. One day we were planning our future and the next she was gone. She left a note saying she needed to move on, that our worlds were too different. I searched for her, Olivia. For months I did everything I could to find her, but it was like she had vanished into thin air." Olivia felt a surge of protectiveness for her mother. "She was scared," she said defensively. "Your family threatened her." "What was she supposed to do?" Surprise flashed across Alexander's face. "My family threatened her? What are you talking about?" "Your mother," Olivia explained, watching Alexander's reaction carefully. "She told my mom to leave, threatened to ruin our family if she didn't." Alexander sat back, shock evident in his features. I had no idea," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My mother never said a word. All this time I thought—" "You thought my mum just abandoned you," Olivia finished for him. She felt a sudden surge of sympathy for this man who had been as much in the dark as she had been. Alexander nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I built my whole life around that belief," he said. "I threw myself into work, into building my company. I thought if I could be successful enough, powerful enough, I could protect myself from ever being hurt like that again." Olivia studied him, seeing the pain and regret in his eyes. "And now that you know the truth, what do you want?" "I want to know you, Olivia," Alexander said, his voice earnest. "I've missed so much of your life. I can never get those years back. But if you're willing, I'd like to be part of your future." Olivia felt tears pricking at her eyes. How many times had she dreamed of hearing those words? But now that the moment was here, she found herself hesitating. "It's not that simple," she said. "You have a family, a life. Where do I fit into all of that?" Alexander reached out, then stopped himself, unsure if the gesture would be welcome. "I won't lie to you, Olivia. This situation, it's complicated. My wife and children, they're struggling with all of this. But you're my daughter. You're part of my family too, if you want to be. And what about my mom? Olivia asked. She raised me alone, sacrificed everything for me. I won't just abandon her for some fairy tale life. I would never ask you to do that, Alexander assured her. Elena, I owe her so much. I want to make things right with her too, if she'll let me. Olivia nodded, feeling overwhelmed by the emotions swirling inside her. I don't know what to say, she admitted. This is all so much to take in. I understand, Alexander said gently. We don't have to figure everything out right now. Maybe we could start small, get to know each other a little at a time. As Olivia considered his words, a commotion near the front of the cafe caught their attention. A group of people with cameras had gathered outside, peering in through the windows. Paparazzi, Alexander muttered, his face darkening. I'm so sorry, Olivia. I should have realized they might follow me. Olivia felt a flash of panic. This was her life now, people following her, taking her picture. What do we do? She asked, shrinking back in her seat. Alexander's protective instincts kicked in. There's a back exit, he said, nodding towards a door near the restrooms. I'll create a distraction and you can slip out unnoticed. Olivia hesitated. Part of her wanted to stay, to continue this conversation that had barely begun, but the thought of facing those cameras, of having her face splashed across the news, was too much to bear. Okay, she agreed, but this isn't the end of our conversation, right? Alexander's face softened. No, it's not. If you're willing, I'd like to meet again. Somewhere more private next time. Olivia nodded, then stood up. As she made her way towards the back exit, she heard Alexander's voice rise, addressing the crowd outside. She paused at the door, looking back one last time. Alexander caught her eye and gave her a small, sad smile before turning back to the reporters. As Olivia slipped out into the alley behind the cafe, her mind was reeling. She had come here looking for answers, but instead she had found a whole new set of questions. Who was Alexander Blackwood really? Could she trust him? And more importantly, did she want him in her life? The sound of Alexander's voice drifted from the front of the cafe, strong and authoritative as he addressed the media. Yes, I have recently discovered that I have a daughter. This is a private family matter, and I ask that you respect our privacy as we navigate this new reality. Olivia quickened her pace, turning onto a side street and blending into the crowd. As she walked, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Alexander. I'm sorry about the interruption. Please let me know when you're ready to talk again. Take all the time you need. She stared at the message, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Fear, hope, anger, curiosity, all battling for dominance. As she made her way home, Olivia realized that her life would never be the same. The father she had always wondered about was now a real person, with flaws and regrets and a genuine desire to know her. But was she ready to let him in? And if she did, what would it mean for her relationship with her mother, for the life she had built for herself? As the city bustled around her, Olivia felt as if she was standing at a crossroads. The path ahead was unclear, filled with potential joy and heartbreak in equal measure. But for the first time in her life, she had a choice. She could embrace this new reality, with all its complications, or she could walk away. The days following the coffee shop meeting were a whirlwind for both Alexander and Olivia. As news of their connection spread, it seemed that every aspect of their lives was affected, creating ripples that touched everyone around them. For Alexander, the professional fallout was immediate and intense. The morning after meeting Olivia, he arrived at Blackwood Transportation's headquarters to find the board of directors already assembled, their faces a mix of concern and barely concealed anger. Alexander, Gerald Hawthorne, the board's chairman, began as soon as Alexander entered the room. I think it's clear we need to discuss the situation. Alexander nodded, taking his seat at the head of the table. He could feel the weight of every gaze upon him, judging, questioning. I understand your concerns, he said, his voice steady, and I'm prepared to address them. For the next 2 hours, Alexander fielded questions about Olivia, about the potential impact on the company's image, about his ability to lead in the midst of such personal turmoil. He answered each query with calm determination, emphasizing his commitment to both the company and his newfound daughter. Gentlemen, ladies, he said as the meeting drew to a close, I know this situation is unexpected, but I assure you, It will not affect my ability to run this company. In fact, I believe it gives us an opportunity to show the world that Blackwood Transportation is not just a corporate entity, but a company with heart and family values. As the board members filed out, Alexander could sense that while he had managed to quell some fears, the battle was far from over. He would need to work harder than ever to maintain their confidence and keep the company stable. Meanwhile, Olivia was facing challenges of her own. As she arrived at the taxi depot for her shift, she could feel the stares and hear the whispers of her colleagues. News traveled fast, and it seemed everyone had an opinion on her newfound connection to the Blackwood Empire. "Hey, Liv," her friend Marco called out as she approached her cab. "How's it feel to be a secret heiress?" Olivia forced a smile, trying to brush off the comment. "I'm not an heiress, Marco. I'm just me. Same as always." But as she settled into the driver's seat, she couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. Throughout her shift, she found herself hyper-aware of every passenger, wondering if they recognized her from the news reports. If they were judging her based on a story she was still trying to understand herself. By the end of the day, Olivia was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. As she trudged up the stairs to her apartment, she found her mother waiting outside her door, a worried expression on her face. "Mia," Eleanor said softly, pulling Olivia into a hug. "How are you holding up?" Olivia melted into her mother's embrace, feeling like a little girl again. "I don't know, Mum," she admitted, her voice muffled against Elena's shoulder. "Everything's so complicated now." Inside the apartment over cups of steaming tea, Olivia recounted her meeting with Alexander. Elena listened intently, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "He didn't know about me, Mom," Olivia said, watching her mother's reaction carefully. "All these years he thought you just left him." Elena nodded slowly, a pained expression crossing her face. "I always wondered if I made the right choice," she admitted. "But at the time it seemed like the only way to protect you, to give you a chance at a normal life. But now," Olivia pressed, "now that everything's out in the open." Eleanor reached across the table, taking Olivia's hand in hers. "Now, mi amor, the choice is yours. If you want Alexander in your life, I won't stand in the way. But please be careful. The world he comes from, it's very different from ours." As Olivia pondered her mother's words across town, Alexander was facing a different kind of family struggle. He stood outside Emma's bedroom door, knocking gently. "Emma, sweetheart, can we talk?" There was a long pause before he heard a muffled, "Come in." Alexander entered to find his 15-year-old daughter curled up on her bed, her eyes red from crying. "Oh, Emma," Alexander sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I'm so sorry about all of this." Emma looked up at him, her eyes a mixture of hurt and confusion. "Is it true? Do I really have a big sister?" Alexander nodded, choosing his words carefully. "Yes, it's true, but Emma, this doesn't change how much I love you or your brother. You're still my little girl." "But you have another family now," Emma said, her voice small. "What if you like them better?" Alexander felt his heart break at his daughter's words. He gathered Emma into his arms, holding her close. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "You, Thomas, and your mother are my family. Nothing will ever change that. Olivia, she's a part of my life that I didn't know about, and I want to get to know her. But that doesn't mean I'm replacing you or loving you any less." As Emma clung to him, Alexander realized the enormity of the task ahead. Balancing his existing family with his desire to know Olivia would be a delicate act, one that would require patience, understanding, and more love than he had ever been called upon to give before. Later that night, as the Blackwood household settled into an uneasy quiet, Alexander found himself in his study, staring at a photo of Olivia he had managed to obtain. The resemblance to Elena was striking, but he could see traces of himself too, in the set of her jaw, the determined look in her eyes. His phone buzzed with a message. It was from Olivia. "I've been thinking about our meeting. I have more questions. Can we talk again soon?" Alexander felt a surge of hope as he read the message. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A chance to build a relationship with the daughter he had never known. As he typed out a reply, agreeing to meet whenever and wherever Olivia was comfortable, Alexander made a silent vow. He would find a way to make this work, to bring his two worlds together without destroying either. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever was. The clock on his desk chimed midnight, marking the end of another day in this new, complicated reality. But for Alexander, it felt like the beginning of something new, a chance at redemption, at completing a family he hadn't even known was incomplete. As he finally headed to bed, exhausted but oddly hopeful, Alexander realized that the real challenge was just beginning. The world now knew about Olivia, but knowing and understanding were two very different things. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with obstacles, but for the first time in years, Alexander felt truly alive, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in his quest to know his daughter and heal the wounds of the past. The sun was setting over the city skyline as Olivia paced nervously in her small living room. She had agreed to meet Alexander again, this time at a quiet park near her apartment. It felt safer somehow, neutral ground where they could talk without the pressure of prying eyes or the formality of a business setting. As she grabbed her jacket and headed out, Olivia's phone buzzed with a message from her best friend, Jess. "Good luck tonight. Remember, you don't owe him anything. Just be yourself." Olivia smiled, grateful for the support. She had been hesitant to tell anyone about the meeting, but Jess had always been there for her, through thick and thin. Her friend's words gave her strength as she made her way to the park. Alexander was already there when she arrived, sitting on a bench overlooking a small pond. He stood as she approached, a tentative smile on his face. "Olivia, thank you for meeting me again." She nodded, taking a seat on the bench and gesturing for him to join her. For a moment they sat in silence, watching the last rays of sunlight dance across the water. "I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation," Olivia began, her voice soft but steady. "About my mom and your mother and everything." Alexander turned to face her, his expression serious. "So have I. Olivia, I want you to know that I've been doing some investigating of my own. I confronted my mother about what she did to Elena." Olivia's eyes widened in surprise. "You did? What did she say?" Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She didn't deny it. She tried to justify her actions, saying she was protecting me, protecting the family name. But I made it clear that what she did was unacceptable. I've cut ties with her, at least for now." Olivia felt a mix of emotions at this revelation. Part of her was glad that Alexander had stood up for her mother, but another part felt guilty for being the cause of this family rift. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I never meant to come between you and your family." Alexander shook his head firmly. "No, Olivia, you have nothing to be sorry for. My mother's actions were her own, and she needs to face the consequences. You and Elena are my family too, and it's long past time I stood up for you both." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Olivia felt a lump form in her throat. "What does that mean exactly? That we're family?" Alexander turned to face her fully, his eyes intense. "It means whatever you want it to mean, Olivia. I know I can't just walk into your life and expect to be your father in anything but biology, but I'd like the chance to get to know you, to be a part of your life in whatever way you're comfortable with." Olivia nodded slowly, considering his words. "And what about your wife, your other kids? How do they feel about all this?" Alexander's expression softened with a mix of guilt and determination. "It's complicated. Victoria, my wife, she's struggling with all of this, but she's a good person, and she understands that you're not to blame for any of it. My son Thomas, he's angry right now, but I believe he'll come around. And Emma, my youngest, she's actually excited about having a big sister." Olivia couldn't help but smile at the mention of Emma. "She is?" Alexander nodded, a fond smile playing on his lips. "She's always wanted an older sister. She has about 1,000,000 questions for you." For a moment, Olivia allowed herself to imagine it, being a big sister, having a family beyond just her and her mom. It was both thrilling and terrifying. "I don't know if I'm ready for all of that," she admitted. "It's a lot to take in." "I understand," Alexander said gently. "We can take it slow. Maybe you could meet Emma first, just the two of you. I think you'd really hit it off." Olivia considered the offer. Meeting Emma seemed less daunting than trying to navigate a relationship with Alexander's wife or his angry son. "I'd like that," she said finally. "Maybe we could get ice cream or something." Alexander's face lit up with hope. "That sounds perfect. I'll talk to Emma and set it up if that's okay with you." Olivia nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness at the prospect. As they continued to talk, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park. They discussed Olivia's job, her dreams for the future, and Alexander's work at Blackwood Transportation. "You know," Alexander said tentatively, "if you ever wanted to explore other career options, I'd be happy to help. Not that there's anything wrong with driving a taxi, but if you're interested in business—" Olivia tensed slightly. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not looking for handouts. I've worked hard to get where I am." Alexander held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Of course, I didn't mean to imply. I just want you to know that if you ever want to explore opportunities in the corporate world, the door is open." Olivia nodded, relaxing a bit. "Thank you. I'll keep that in mind." As the evening wore on, Olivia found herself feeling more at ease with Alexander. He was different from what she had expected. Not the cold, calculating businessman she had imagined, but a man genuinely trying to make amends for the past. When they finally parted ways, Alexander hesitated for a moment. "Olivia, I know this is all very new and overwhelming, but I want you to know that I'm here whenever you need me. For anything." Olivia smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that she hadn't expected. "Thank you, Alexander. I'm glad we had this chance to talk." As she watched him walk away, Olivia felt a sense of possibility that she hadn't experienced before. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time it felt full of potential rather than limitations. Back at her apartment, Olivia found her mother waiting up for her. Elena's face was a mix of concern and curiosity. "How did it go, Mija?" Olivia sat down next to her mother on the couch, leaning her head on Elena's shoulder. "It was good, I think. We talked a lot. He wants me to meet his daughter, Emma." Elena stroked Olivia's hair gently. "And how do you feel about that?" Olivia was quiet for a moment, considering. "Scared," she admitted, "but also excited. It's weird, Mom. I've spent my whole life wondering about him, and now suddenly he's here, wanting to be part of my life. It's a lot to process." Elena nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Just remember, mi amor, you don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. Take your time, get to know them at your own pace." As Olivia drifted off to sleep that night, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. She thought about Alexander, about Emma, and the rest of the Blackwood family. She thought about her mother, who had sacrificed so much to give her a good life. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where these two worlds could coexist. Not perfectly, perhaps, but in a way that could bring more love and understanding into all their lives. The path ahead was still uncertain, full of potential pitfalls and challenges. But as Olivia closed her eyes, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this unexpected twist in her life could lead to something beautiful. Across town in the Blackwood mansion, Alexander sat in his study, looking at a family photo. His fingers traced the empty space next to Emma, imagining Olivia there. It wouldn't be easy, he knew. There would be resistance, misunderstandings, and probably more than a few arguments. But as he looked at the photo, Alexander felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had been given a second chance, an opportunity to right the wrongs of the past and build a future that included all of his children. It was a challenge he was determined to meet, no matter the obstacles that lay ahead. With a deep breath, Alexander picked up his phone and dialed Victoria's number. It was time to have an honest conversation with his wife about the future of their family. A future that, he hoped, would include Olivia. As the phone rang, Alexander steeled himself for the difficult conversation ahead. The journey to bring his family together was just beginning, but he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, driven by the hope of finally having all his children in his life. The bustling ice cream parlor was a riot of colors and cheerful chatter as Olivia nervously scanned the crowd. She had agreed to meet Emma here, away from the watchful eyes of their parents, hoping that a neutral, fun environment might make their first encounter less awkward. Her eyes landed on a young girl with long, dark hair who bore an unmistakable resemblance to Alexander. Emma's eyes lit up as she spotted Olivia, and she waved enthusiastically. "Olivia!" "Over here," Emma called out, her voice filled with excitement. As Olivia made her way to the table, she felt a mix of emotions. Nervousness, certainly, but also a strange sense of anticipation. This girl was her sister, a concept that still felt foreign and surreal. "Hi, Emma," Olivia said, sliding into the seat across from her. "It's nice to finally meet you." Emma beamed, her smile infectious. "I'm so excited you agreed to meet me. Dad's told me so much about you. Is it true you drive a taxi? That must be so cool." Olivia couldn't help but chuckle at Emma's enthusiasm. "It has its moments," she admitted, "though I'm sure it's not as exciting as you might think." As they ordered their ice cream, a triple chocolate sundae for Emma and a simple vanilla cone for Olivia, the initial awkwardness began to melt away. Emma was curious about everything, peppering Olivia with questions about her life, her interests, and her experiences. "So, what's it like growing up as an only child?" Emma asked, digging into her sundae with gusto. Olivia paused, considering the question. "It was quiet, I guess. My mum and I are really close, but I always wondered what it would be like to have siblings." Emma's eyes sparkled. "Well, now you do. I've always wanted a big sister. Someone to talk to about stuff I can't tell Mum and Dad." As they continued to chat, Olivia found herself relaxing more and more. Emma's openness and genuine interest were disarming, making it easy to forget the complicated circumstances that had brought them together. "You know," Emma said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "Thomas isn't as mad as he pretends to be. He's just scared." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Scared? Of what?" Emma shrugged. "Of things changing, I guess. But I told him having a big sister is awesome. I mean, look at you. You're so cool and independent. Maybe you could teach me how to drive someday." Olivia laughed, touched by Emma's admiration. "Maybe when you're a bit older," she said with a wink. "For now, how about we stick to ice cream outings?" As their time together drew to a close, Olivia was surprised to find herself reluctant to leave. Emma had a way of making her feel like she belonged, like the missing piece of a puzzle finally sliding into place. "We should do this again soon," Emma said as they stood to leave. "Maybe next time you could show me around your neighborhood. I bet you know all the cool spots." Olivia nodded, smiling. "I'd like that, Emma, I really would." As they parted ways outside the ice cream parlor, Emma surprised Olivia with a quick hug. "I'm really glad you're my sister," she whispered, before darting off to where Alexander was waiting in his car. Olivia stood there for a moment, watching them drive away. The afternoon had been a whirlwind of emotions, but one thing was clear. Emma had found a place in her heart, and the idea of being a big sister was beginning to feel less daunting and more exciting. Later that evening, as Olivia recounted the meeting to her mother, Elena watched her daughter's animated expressions with a mix of joy and trepidation. "It sounds like you had a wonderful time, Mika," Elena said softly. "Emma seems like a sweet girl." Olivia nodded, her eyes bright. "She is, Mom, and it was nice to feel like I belonged, you know." Elena reached out, taking Olivia's hand in hers. "I'm happy for you, my love. But remember, take things slow. This is all very new for all of you." Olivia squeezed her mother's hand. "I know, Mom. And nothing will ever change what we have. You're still my rock, my foundation." As they embraced, both women felt the shift in their world, an expansion of their small family unit to include new connections, new possibilities. Across town, in the Blackwood mansion, a different conversation was taking place. Alexander sat in the living room with Victoria, Thomas, and Emma, discussing the afternoon's events. "She's so cool, Mom," Emma gushed. "Olivia knows all about the city, and she promised to show me around sometime. Can I go, please?" Victoria's smile was strained but genuine. "We'll see, sweetheart. Let's take things one step at a time." Thomas, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "Does this mean she's going to be around all the time now? Are we supposed to just pretend we're one big happy family?" Alexander sighed, turning to his son. "Thomas, I know this is hard for you, for all of us. But Olivia is a part of this family now. We're not pretending anything. We're trying to build something new, something that includes everyone." Thomas stood up abruptly. "Whatever. I'm going to my room." As he stormed off, Victoria placed a gentle hand on Alexander's arm. "Give him time," she said softly. "This is a lot for him to process." Alexander nodded, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He was trying to balance so many needs, so many emotions, but seeing the joy on Emma's face as she talked about Olivia gave him hope that eventually they could all find a way to coexist. Later that night, as the house settled into silence, Alexander's phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Thank you for today. Emma is amazing. I think I'd like to try this." Being a sister, I mean. Alexander felt a warmth spread through his chest as he read the message. It was a small step, but an important one. As he drifted off to sleep, he allowed himself to imagine a future where all his children could gather around the same table, sharing laughter and love. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time since the revelation of Olivia's existence, Alexander felt truly hopeful. They were building bridges, slowly but surely, connecting two worlds that had once seemed impossibly far apart. As the city slept, two families, once separate, now irrevocably linked, dreamed of the possibilities that lay ahead. The journey of healing and reconciliation had only just begun, but with each small step, each shared moment, they were moving closer to a future where the word family took on a new, more inclusive meaning. The challenges were far from over, but tonight at least, hope burned brightly in the hearts of both the Blackwoods and the Martinezes. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new obstacles to overcome, but for now they allowed themselves to bask in the glow of new connections, new horizons opening up before them. Olivia reached across the table, squeezing Marco's hand. "I appreciate your concern, I really do, but I need to see where this leads. It's a part of me I never knew existed." As they parted ways, Olivia couldn't shake a sense of unease. She loved her work at Blackwood Transportation, the challenges it presented, the new relationships she was building. But was she losing touch with her roots in the process? Later that evening, the Blackwood mansion was alive with activity. It was Emma's birthday, and for the first time, Olivia and Elena had been invited to join the family celebration. Olivia stood in the grand foyer, feeling out of place despite her carefully chosen outfit. Elena squeezed her hand reassuringly as Victoria greeted them. "I'm so glad you could make it," Victoria said, her smile warm but slightly strained. "Emma's been talking about nothing else all week." As they made their way to the backyard where the party was in full swing, Olivia was struck by the opulence of it all. Caterers weaved through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres, a string quartet played softly in the corner, and a towering cake stood on a table adorned with flowers. Emma rushed over, enveloping Olivia in a hug. "You came! Come on, I want to introduce you to my friends." As Olivia allowed herself to be pulled into the crowd, she caught sight of Thomas standing off to the side, looking uncomfortable. Their eyes met, and he gave her a small nod before turning away. The evening progressed, a strange mix of joy and tension. Olivia found herself constantly torn between worlds, chatting with Emma and her teenage friends one moment, discussing business with Alexander's colleagues the next, all while trying to ensure her mother didn't feel left out. It was during a quiet moment, as Olivia stood by the refreshment table catching her breath, that she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "I'm telling you," a man's voice said in a low tone, "Hawthorne is making moves. He's rallying support among the minor shareholders. I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to oust Alexander at the next board meeting." "But surely he can't," another voice responded. "Alexander built this company from the ground up." "True, but with all this family drama, the dip in profits, Hawthorne thinks he can make a case for new leadership." Olivia's mind raced. She had to warn Alexander, but as she turned to find him, she collided with Thomas, who had apparently been listening to the same conversation. Their eyes met, a moment of shared concern passing between them. "We need to tell Dad," Thomas said, his voice low and urgent. Olivia nodded, but before they could move, Emma's voice rang out across the yard. "Time for cake." As the crowd gathered around the birthday girl, Olivia and Thomas exchanged a look of frustration. This wasn't the time or place for such a discussion. They would have to wait. The rest of the evening passed in a blur for Olivia. She went through the motions of celebrating, but her mind was preoccupied with what she had overheard. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, she finally managed to pull Alexander aside. "We need to talk," she said urgently. "It's about the company." Alexander's brow furrowed with concern. "What is it?" But before Olivia could explain, Eleanor appeared at her side. "Miha, it's getting late. We should go." Olivia hesitated, torn between her desire to warn Alexander and her commitment to her mother. Alexander, sensing her dilemma, gave her a reassuring smile. "It's okay, Olivia. We can discuss this tomorrow at the office. Go home with your mother." As Olivia and Elena drove home in silence, the lights of the city blurring past, Olivia felt the weight of her two worlds pressing down on her. She was part of the Blackwood family now, invested in the company's success. But she was also still Olivia. Martinez, daughter of Elena, friend of Marco. How could she balance these parts of herself? And more importantly, how could she protect her newfound family from the storms that were gathering on the horizon? Back at the Blackwood mansion, as the last of the guests departed, Alexander found himself in his study, a glass of scotch in hand. The evening had been a success on the surface, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Victoria entered quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You seem distracted tonight," she observed. "Is everything all right?" Alexander sighed, covering her hand with his own. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "There are challenges at work, and I can't help but feel that bringing Olivia into this world has complicated things for her." Victoria sat beside him, her expression thoughtful. "Change is never easy, Alexander, for any of us, but we're family now, all of us. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." As Alexander nodded, trying to take comfort in his wife's words, he couldn't shake the feeling that their family's newfound harmony was about to be tested in ways none of them could have anticipated. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the old oak tree in the garden. A storm was coming, both literally and figuratively, and as the first drops of rain began to fall, Alexander Blackwood steeled himself for the battles that lay ahead, battles that would test the strength of his company, his family, and the delicate new bonds they had all worked so hard to forge. The early morning sun streamed through the windows of Blackwood Transportation's executive floor as Olivia hurried towards Alexander's office. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with the conversation she had overheard at Emma's party. As she approached, she saw Thomas already there, pacing outside the door. "Did you tell him?" Olivia asked, slightly out of breath. Thomas shook his head. "I wanted to wait for you. We should do this together." Their eyes met, a moment of understanding passing between them. Despite their initial awkwardness, they had become allies in this. Alexander looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from surprise to concern at their serious faces. "What's going on?" Olivia took a deep breath. "Dad, we overheard something at the party last night about Gerald Hawthorne." As they recounted what they had heard, Alexander's face grew increasingly grim. When they finished, he sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled in thought. "I suspected Hawthorne was up to something," he said finally, "but I didn't think he'd move this quickly." "What are we going to do?" Thomas asked, his voice tight with worry. Alexander stood, moving to look out the window at the city below. "We fight," he said simply, "but we need to be smart about this. Hawthorne has influence, and he'll use every trick in the book to discredit me." Olivia stepped forward, determination in her eyes. "How can we help?" Alexander turned, a mix of pride and concern on his face. "I appreciate your offer, both of you, but this could get ugly. I don't want either of you caught in the crossfire." "We're already in this, Dad," Thomas insisted. "This company, this family, it's as much ours as it is yours." Olivia nodded in agreement. "We're stronger together. Let us help." Alexander looked at his children, seeing the determination in their eyes. He felt a surge of pride, tinged with a hint of fear for what lay ahead. "All right," he said finally, "but we do this carefully. We need a plan." For the next hour, they strategized. Thomas would discreetly reach out to loyal board members, shoring up support. Olivia would use her connections in the company to gauge the mood among the employees and gather any useful information. As they were wrapping up, Alexander's phone buzzed. It was a message from Victoria. "Emergency at Emma's school. Can you come?" Alexander frowned, torn between his responsibilities. Olivia, seeing his dilemma, spoke up. "Go. Thomas and I can handle things here." With a grateful nod, Alexander hurried out, leaving Olivia and Thomas to continue their planning. Across town, Elena Martinez sat in a small cafe, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. Across from her sat Marco, Olivia's longtime friend, his expression troubled. "I'm worried about her, Elena," Marco said. "It's like she's being swallowed up by that world." Elena sighed, understanding Marco's concerns all too well. "I know, but Olivia's finding a part of herself she never knew existed. We have to support her." Marco leaned forward, his voice low. "But at what cost?" "I've been hearing things, Elena. Rumors about trouble at Blackwood Transportation. What if Olivia gets caught up in something she can't handle? Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had noticed Olivia's preoccupation lately, the late-night phone calls, the worried glances. What kind of trouble? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. As Marco shared what he had heard, whispers of power struggles and potential scandals, Elena's concern grew. She had wanted Olivia to have the chance to know her father, to explore that part of her heritage, but had she inadvertently pushed her daughter into a dangerous situation? Meanwhile, at Emma's school, Alexander arrived to find Victoria waiting outside the principal's office, her face a mask of worry. "What happened?" he asked, taking her hand. Victoria squeezed his hand, her voice low. "Emma got into a fight. Apparently some kids were saying things about Olivia, about our family situation." Alexander felt a surge of anger and guilt. He had been so focused on the company, on integrating Olivia into their lives, that he had overlooked how it might be affecting Emma at school. As they sat with the principal, listening to the details of the incident, Alexander's mind raced. How could he protect his family from the fallout of his past decisions? How could he balance the needs of all his children? Back at Blackwood Transportation, Olivia and Thomas were deep in discussion when Gerald Hawthorne suddenly appeared in the doorway of the conference room they were using. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "Isn't this cozy? The prodigal daughter and the heir apparent, plotting together." Olivia felt her hackles rise, but Thomas spoke before she could. "We're working on a project, Mr. Hawthorne. Is there something we can help you with?" Hawthorne's eyes narrowed slightly. "Just curious about what has you two so engrossed. After all, the company's future is at stake. We wouldn't want any inexperienced hands influencing crucial decisions." The implication was clear, and Olivia felt a surge of anger. But she kept her voice calm as she replied, "We're all working towards the same goal, Mr. Hawthorne, the company's success." Hawthorne smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, my dear. Of course." With a nod he left, but the tension in the room lingered. As the day wore on, the challenges seemed to multiply. Alexander returned from Emma's school, his face lined with worry. Olivia received a text from her mother, asking her to come home for an urgent discussion. Thomas uncovered evidence that Hawthorne had been meeting secretly with key shareholders. By evening, the Blackwood mansion was a hive of tension. Alexander, Victoria, Thomas, Olivia, and Elena sat in the living room, each bearing news that added to the growing sense of crisis. "We need to decide how to handle this," Alexander said, his voice weary. "Hawthorne is making his move. The press is sniffing around for a story, and our family is under scrutiny from all sides." Olivia looked around the room, at the faces of the people who had become her family in such a short time. She thought of Marco's warnings, of the life she had known before. For a moment she felt overwhelmed by the weight of it all, but then she caught Emma's eye. The younger girl gave her a small, encouraging smile, and Olivia felt a renewed sense of determination. "We face it head-on," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "All of us, together. We're family now, for better or worse." Eleanor reached out, taking her daughter's hand. "Whatever you decide, Mika, I'm with you." One by one, the others nodded in agreement. Alexander looked around at his assembled family, biological and chosen, and felt a surge of pride and determination. "All right," he said, sitting up straighter. "Here's what we're going to do." As they began to plan their strategy, the rain that had been threatening all day finally began to fall. It pattered against the windows, a steady rhythm that seemed to underscore the gravity of their discussion. They were at a crossroads, each of them facing decisions that would shape not only their individual futures, but the future of their newly forged family. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and potential pitfalls. But as they talked late into the night, one thing became clear. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them together. The bonds they had formed, tested by fire and strengthened by adversity, would be their greatest asset in the battles to come. As midnight approached and the plans were set, Alexander looked around at his family. Victoria, his rock through so many challenges. Thomas stepping up to fight for the company's future. Emma, fierce in her loyalty despite her young age. Olivia, bridging two worlds with grace and determination. And Elena, a testament to resilience and forgiveness. The following weeks at Blackwood Transportation were a whirlwind of activity. Alexander, Thomas, and Olivia worked tirelessly to implement their plan, each taking on crucial roles in the fight to maintain control of the company. Olivia found herself in a unique position. Her background as a taxi driver, once seen as a liability in the corporate world, now proved to be an invaluable asset. She spearheaded an initiative to improve driver satisfaction and efficiency, drawing on her first-hand experience to create policies that resonated with the workforce. One afternoon, as she presented her findings to a group of mid-level managers, Olivia caught sight of Gerald Hawthorne lurking at the back of the room. His expression was unreadable, but she could feel his eyes boring into her as she spoke. Undeterred, Olivia pressed on. By implementing these changes, we not only improve working conditions for our drivers, but also increase overall efficiency by 15%. This translates to significant cost savings and improved customer satisfaction. As the managers nodded approvingly and jotted down notes, Olivia felt a surge of confidence. She was making a real difference, proving her worth not through her connection to Alexander, but through her own merits. Meanwhile, Thomas was engaged in his own battles. He spent hours in meetings with board members and shareholders, presenting a vision for the company's future that balanced innovation with stability. It was grueling work, but Thomas found himself rising to the challenge in ways he never had before. One evening, as he and Olivia were working late in the office, Thomas leaned back in his chair with a sigh. "You know," he said, a hint of a smile on his face, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you're here, Olivia. I couldn't do this alone." Olivia looked up from her computer, surprised by the admission. "Thanks, Thomas. That means a lot." A comfortable silence fell between them, the tension that had marked their early interactions now replaced by a growing sense of sibling camaraderie. At home, the dynamics were shifting as well. Emma, inspired by Olivia's strength in the face of adversity, had thrown herself into volunteer work at a local community center. She was determined to bridge the gap between her privileged upbringing and the realities faced by many in their city. One Saturday, as Emma was preparing to leave for her volunteer shift, she hesitated at the door. "Mom," she called out to Victoria, do you think Olivia might want to come with me sometime? To the community center?" Victoria felt a warmth spread through her chest at her daughter's words. "I think she'd love that, Emma. Why don't you ask her?" As Emma nodded and headed out, Victoria found herself reflecting on how much their family had changed. The initial shock and resentment had given way to a new kind of harmony, one that incorporated Olivia and Elena in ways she never could have imagined. But even as the Blackwood Martinez family grew stronger, the threats from outside intensified. Gerald Hawthorne was becoming bolder in his moves against Alexander, and rumors of a potential takeover bid were circulating through the company. Alexander found himself working around the clock, strategizing with his team and rallying support among key stakeholders. The stress was taking its toll, and Victoria often found him in his study late at night, poring over reports and financial statements. "Alex," she said softly one night, placing a hand on his shoulder, "you need to rest. You can't fight this battle if you're exhausted." Alexander leaned into her touch, grateful for her steady presence. "I know," he sighed, "but there's so much at stake. Not just the company, but our family. Everything we've built." Victoria knelt beside him, taking his hands in hers. "And that's exactly why you need to take care of yourself. We're all in this together, remember? Let us help you carry this burden." As Alexander nodded, allowing Victoria to lead him to bed, he felt a renewed sense of determination. They had overcome so much already. They would weather this storm too. The next morning, as Alexander arrived at the office, he was met with an unexpected sight. Olivia and Thomas were already there, heads bent together over a stack of documents. "What's all this?" Alexander asked, curiosity peaking. Olivia looked up, a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. "We think we've found something, Dad. A way to counter Hawthorne's moves and secure our position." As they laid out their plan, a combination of strategic partnerships, innovative tech investments, and a renewed focus on corporate social responsibility, Alexander felt a surge of pride. His children, once at odds, were now working together seamlessly, their complementary skills creating something truly powerful. But even as hope blossomed, new challenges emerged. Elena called Olivia one afternoon, her voice tight with worry. "Mija," she said, I've been hearing things. People in the neighborhood, they're saying the Blackwoods are exploiting you, using you for good press. I know it's not true, but Olivia felt a pang of frustration. She had worked so hard to balance her two worlds, to stay true to her roots while embracing her new family. It's not true, Mom, she said firmly. I'm here because I want to be, because I'm making a difference. As she hung up, Olivia realized that the battle they were fighting wasn't just in the boardroom. It was in the court of public opinion, in the whispered conversations and sidelong glances that followed her everywhere she went. That evening, as the extended family gathered for dinner, a tradition they had started in the midst of the crisis, Olivia looked around the table. Alexander and Victoria, their faces lined with worry, but their eyes filled with determination. Thomas, who had become not just a brother but a true friend. Emma, whose innocence and enthusiasm reminded them all of what they were fighting for. And her mother, Eleanor, who had overcome her own fears and prejudices to embrace this new reality. As they shared their meal and their stories of the day, Olivia felt a sense of peace wash over her. Yes, there were storms raging outside. Yes, the future was uncertain, but here in this moment they were strong, they were united. As the dinner wound down and everyone began to disperse, Alexander stood up, clinking his glass for attention. I just want to say, he began, his voice thick with emotion, how proud I am of all of you. We're facing challenges I never could have imagined, but seeing how we've come together, it gives me hope. More than that, it gives me strength. A chorus of agreement went around the table, and as Olivia met Alexander's eyes, she saw in them a reflection of her own determination. Whatever came next, they would face it as a family. Little did they know that the true test of their newfound strength was just around the corner. As they savored this moment of unity, forces were aligning against them, preparing to strike at the very heart of everything they held dear. But for now, in the eye of the storm, the Blackwood Martinez family stood strong, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together. The morning dawned grey and overcast, a fitting backdrop for the tension that hung over Blackwood transportation. As Alexander strode into the lobby, he could feel the eyes of employees following him, their whispers barely audible over the hum of activity. He had barely reached his office when Sarah, his assistant, hurried in, her face pale. Mr. Blackwood, there's something you need to see. She handed him a tablet open to a financial news website. The headline made Alexander's blood run cold. Blackwood Transportation in turmoil. Insider trading allegations surface. As he scanned the article, Alexander felt a growing sense of dread. The piece cited anonymous sources claiming that he had used insider information to benefit personally from company deals. It was a blatant lie, but the implications were severe. Before he could fully process the information, his phone buzzed with a message from Thomas. Emergency board meeting called 1 hour. Hawthorne's making his move. Alexander took a deep breath, steeling himself for the battle ahead. He had known this was coming, but the suddenness of it still caught him off guard. Across town, Olivia was just starting her shift at the taxi company when her phone exploded with notifications. As she read the news, she felt a mix of anger and fear. She knew in her gut that this was Hawthorne's doing, a calculated move to discredit Alexander and seize control of the company. Without hesitation, she called her supervisor. "Family emergency," she said, her voice tight. "I need to take the day off." As she navigated through the morning traffic, Olivia's mind raced. She had come to care deeply for the Blackwoods, to see them as her family. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered doubts. What if the allegations were true? What if she had been naive, too quick to trust? She shook her head, banishing the thought. She knew Alexander, had seen his integrity firsthand. Whatever was happening, she was certain he was not to blame. At Blackwood Transportation, the boardroom was a powder keg of tension. Board members spoke in hushed, urgent tones, their eyes darting between Alexander and Gerald Hawthorne, who sat at the opposite end of the table, a satisfied smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. As the meeting was called to order, Hawthorne wasted no time in launching his attack. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, his voice dripping with false concern, "we find ourselves in a grave situation. The allegations against Mr. Blackwood are serious, and, if true, represent a betrayal of this company and its shareholders." Alexander felt a surge of anger, but he kept his voice calm as he responded. "These allegations are completely false, and I'm confident that a full investigation will clear my name. This is nothing more than a transparent attempt to seize control of the company." The room erupted into heated debate. Some board members voiced their support for Alexander, citing his years of leadership and integrity. Others, swayed by Hawthorne's insinuations, called for Alexander to step down pending an investigation. As the argument raged, Thomas slipped out of the room, his face grim. In the hallway, he found Olivia waiting, her eyes wide with concern. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "Bad. Hawthorne's got some of the board convinced. We need to find a way to prove these allegations are false and fast." Olivia nodded, determination setting in. "Okay, let's get to work. There has to be a paper trail, something we can use to clear Dad's name." As they hurried towards the financial department, both siblings felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on them. This wasn't just about saving the company anymore. It was about protecting their family, about standing up for the truth in the face of deceit. Meanwhile, at the Blackwood mansion, Victoria was fielding a barrage of calls from friends, business associates, and reporters. She maintained a calm exterior, but inside she was seething with anger at the attacks on her husband. Emma, home from school and upset by the news, found her mother in the study, hanging up the phone with a weary sigh. "Mom," Emma said, her voice small, "is Dad going to be okay?" Victoria pulled her daughter into a tight hug. "Your father is a good man, Emma. We're going to get through this, I promise." As she held her daughter, Victoria's mind was already working, planning their next moves. She had weathered storms with Alexander before, and she wasn't about to let this one tear them down. Back at Blackwood Transportation, the board meeting had devolved into chaos. Hawthorne, sensing his advantage, pressed his attack. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in Alexander Blackwood's leadership," he announced, his voice ringing out over the din. Alexander stood, his voice cutting through the noise. "Before you take that vote, I suggest we adjourn to review the evidence. I have nothing to hide, and I'm confident that a thorough examination of the company's records will vindicate me." It was a gamble, but it bought them time. As the board members filed out, many of them avoiding Alexander's gaze, he felt a moment of doubt. Had he underestimated Hawthorne? Had he been too focused on integrating Olivia into their lives, on healing old wounds that he had left the company vulnerable? But as he stepped into the hallway, he saw Olivia and Thomas huddled over a computer, their faces intense with concentration. The sight of his children, working together to defend him and the company, filled Alexander with a renewed sense of purpose. He approached them, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "What have you found?" he asked, hope creeping into his voice. Olivia looked up, a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. "We think we've found something, Dad. A discrepancy in the dates of the alleged insider trades. If we can prove this, it could unravel Hawthorne's whole case." Alexander felt a surge of pride and gratitude. "Good work, both of you. Let's dig deeper. We need to be thorough. Hawthorne won't give up easily." As they worked late into the night, combing through financial records and piecing together the truth, the Blackwood family found strength in their unity. Victoria arrived with food and words of encouragement. Emma, determined to help, took on the task of organizing their findings. Even Elena, initially hesitant to get involved in what she saw as Blackwood business, arrived to offer her support. "Family stands together," she said simply, giving Olivia a hug before rolling up her sleeves to help. As the clock ticked towards midnight, they began to see the full picture emerging. Not only were the allegations against Alexander false, but there was evidence suggesting that Hawthorne himself had been involved in some questionable dealings. "This is it," Thomas said, his voice tight with excitement. "This could not only clear Dad, but take Hawthorne down for good." Alexander looked around at his family, biological and chosen, all working together in defense of truth and justice. He felt a swell of emotion in his chest. Whatever happened tomorrow, he knew that they had already won the most important battle. They had become a true family, bound by love, trust, and shared purpose. As they prepared to present their findings to the board the next day, Alexander gathered everyone together. "I want to thank you all," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "No matter what happens tomorrow, know that I am proud of each and every one of you. We are stronger together than I ever imagined possible." The family shared a moment of solidarity, drawing strength from each other for the battle ahead. As they left the office, stepping out into the cool night air, they could feel the winds of change swirling around them. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own victories and setbacks. But tonight, in this moment, they were unbreakable. The storm might rage, but the Blackwood-Martinez family stood strong, a beacon of unity in the face of adversity. Little did they know that their greatest test was yet to come, a challenge that would push them to their limits and force them to confront truths long buried. But for now they walked together into the night, ready to face whatever the dawn might bring. The morning of the crucial board meeting dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the turbulent emotions swirling within the Blackwood family. Alexander stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie with steady hands that belied the anxiety churning in his stomach. This was it, the moment that would determine not just his future, but the future of the company he had built from the ground up. Victoria appeared behind him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've got this, Alex," she said softly. "The truth is on your side." Alexander covered her hand with his own, drawing strength from her unwavering support. "Thank you," he murmured, "for everything." Downstairs, Olivia and Thomas were going over their presentation one last time. The evidence they had uncovered was damning, not just clearing Alexander's name, but implicating Gerald Hawthorne in a web of deceit and manipulation. "Are we sure about this?" Olivia asked, a hint of doubt creeping into her voice. "Once we present this, there's no going back. Hawthorne will be ruined." Thomas met his sister's gaze, his expression resolute. "He brought this on himself, Olivia. He was willing to destroy our family, to tear apart everything Dad built. He doesn't deserve mercy." Olivia nodded, pushing aside her misgivings. This was about justice, about protecting their family and the livelihoods of everyone who depended on Blackwood transportation. As they prepared to leave, Emma appeared, her school backpack slung over her shoulder. "I want to come," she announced, her chin lifted in determination. Alexander and Victoria exchanged a glance. "Sweetheart," Victoria began gently, "this is going to be a difficult day." "Are you sure?" Emma nodded fiercely. "This is about our family. I want to be there, please." After a moment's hesitation, Alexander agreed. "All right, but you stay with your mother, okay?" As they drove to Blackwood Transportation Headquarters, the city passing by in a blur, each member of the family was lost in their own thoughts. Alexander rehearsed his opening statement. Victoria planned for every possible outcome. Thomas and Olivia reviewed their evidence, and Emma prayed in her own way for everything to work out. The boardroom was tense as they entered, the air thick with anticipation. Gerald Hawthorne sat at the far end of the table, a smug smile playing at the corners of his mouth. But as he took in the united front of the Blackwood family, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Alexander began, his voice steady and clear, "we're here today to address the allegations that have been made against me, and by extension against this company. But before we proceed, I want to make one thing clear. Blackwood Transportation has always operated with integrity, transparency, and a commitment to ethical business practices. That hasn't changed, and it never will." He nodded to Thomas and Olivia, who stepped forward with their presentation. As they laid out their findings, the manipulated dates, the falsified documents, the trail leading back to Hawthorne himself, the room fell into a stunned silence. Hawthorne's face grew increasingly pale as the evidence mounted against him. When Thomas revealed financial records showing Hawthorne's secret deals with a competitor, the older man finally snapped. "This is absurd," he shouted, rising to his feet. "You can't possibly expect anyone to believe these fabrications. This is nothing but a desperate attempt by Blackwood to cling to power." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The board members exchanged troubled glances, the weight of the evidence impossible to ignore. Alexander stepped forward once more. "I didn't want to believe it myself," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "Gerald, we've worked together for years. I trusted you, but the evidence is clear. You were willing to destroy this company, to ruin lives all for your own gain." As Hawthorne sputtered and raged, security was called to escort him from the building. The board quickly voted to launch a full investigation into his activities and to publicly reaffirm their support for Alexander's leadership. In the aftermath, as reporters clamored outside for a statement, the Blackwood family found themselves alone in Alexander's office. The relief was palpable, but so was the exhaustion of the ordeal they had just endured. "It's over," Victoria breathed, pulling Alexander into a tight embrace. "You did it." "We did it." Alexander held his wife close, looking over her shoulder at his children, Thomas, Olivia, and Emma. "We all did it," he corrected gently. "I couldn't have gotten through this without all of you." Olivia felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. For so long she had felt like an outsider, unsure of her place in this world. But standing here in this moment of triumph, she knew without a doubt that she belonged. As they prepared to face the press, Alexander turned to his family one last time. "Whatever happens next, we face it together, as a family." They nodded in unison, a united front against whatever challenges lay ahead. But even as they celebrated their victory, none of them could have anticipated the ripple effects that were already spreading outward. The exposure of Hawthorne's corruption would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Blackwood Transportation, but for the entire industry. And for Olivia, the realization that she had played a crucial role in bringing down a powerful figure was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had stepped fully into the Blackwood world now, for better or for worse. As she followed her family out to face the sea of cameras and microphones, she couldn't help but wonder, what would this mean for her future? For her relationship with her mother and her old life? The answers to these questions would have to wait. For now, there were statements to be made, questions to be answered, and a family legacy to be protected. Olivia took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped into the spotlight alongside her father and siblings. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced this crisis. Together, united by bonds stronger than blood, forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by love. As the cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, the Blackwood Martinez family stood strong. They had weathered the storm, emerged victorious, and now faced a future bright with possibility and fraught with new challenges they had yet to imagine. In the weeks following the dramatic board meeting, the Blackwood Martinez family found themselves navigating a new landscape, both personally and professionally. The exposure of Gerald Hawthorne's corruption had sent shockwaves through the business world, and Blackwood Transportation was at the center of a media storm. Olivia stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting her new business suit. The reflection that stared back at her was almost unrecognizable. Gone was the casual attire of a taxi driver, replaced by the polished look of a corporate executive. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for another day in the spotlight. As she made her way downstairs, she found Elena in the kitchen preparing breakfast. The sight of her mother in the Blackwood mansion still felt surreal at times. After the crisis, Alexander had insisted that Elena move in, at least temporarily, to keep the family close and protected from the media frenzy. "Mija," Elena said, her voice a mixture of pride and concern. "You look beautiful, but are you sure about all this? This world? It's so different from what we know." Olivia smiled, embracing her mother. "I'm sure, Mom, it's not just about the company anymore. It's about family. Our family." As they sat down to eat, Alexander joined them, his face weary but determined. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of press conferences, legal meetings, and strategic planning sessions. The company was stable, but there was still much work to be done to restore public confidence and implement the changes they had promised. "Big day today," Alexander said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "The new initiative launches. Are you ready, Olivia?" Olivia nodded, excitement bubbling up despite her nerves. The initiative had been her brainchild, a comprehensive program to improve working conditions and career advancement opportunities for all employees, from drivers to executives. It was a bold move, one that set Blackwood Transportation apart in an industry often criticized for its treatment of workers. "I'm ready," she affirmed. "This is going to change lives, Dad. I can feel it." As they prepared to leave, Thomas appeared, looking sharp in his suit but with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of long nights spent poring over financial reports. The exposure of Hawthorne's dealings had necessitated a top-to-bottom audit of the company, and Thomas had thrown himself into the task with a dedication that surprised even his father. "Latest numbers are in," he announced, waving a folder. "We're starting to see an uptick in investor confidence. This initiative could be the tipping point we need." The family shared a moment of quiet triumph. They had been through so much, faced challenges that might have torn other families apart. But here they were, stronger and more united than ever. As they arrived at Blackwood Transportation headquarters, they were met by a sea of reporters and cameras. Victoria and Emma were already there, having gone ahead to help set up for the press conference. Olivia felt a momentary flash of panic as the questions began flying. But then she felt Alexander's hand on her shoulder, saw Thomas's encouraging nod, and remembered the countless hours of preparation they had put in. She stepped up to the microphones, her voice clear and confident. "Good morning," she began. "Today, Blackwood Transportation is proud to announce a groundbreaking initiative that will redefine our commitment to our employees and set a new standard for the industry." As Olivia outlined the details of the program, she could see the reporters' expressions changing from skepticism to interest. This wasn't just a PR move. It was a fundamental shift in how the company operated, one that put people at the center of its business model. From the sidelines, Eleanor watched her daughter with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Olivia seemed so at home in this world now, articulate and passionate as she fielded questions from the press. But Elena couldn't help but worry about the pressure, the scrutiny that came with such a high-profile position. As the press conference wound down, Alexander stepped forward to make a surprising announcement. "As we move forward into this new era for Blackwood Transportation, I'm pleased to announce some changes to our leadership structure. Effective immediately, Olivia Martinez will be taking on the role of Director of Employee Relations and Corporate Social Responsibility." A murmur rippled through the crowd. It was an unconventional move, appointing someone so new to the company to such a high-level position. But as Olivia stepped forward to accept the role, her poise and determination were evident to all. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," she said, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she addressed her father so formally. "I am honored to accept this position and committed to ensuring that Blackwood Transportation not only leads our industry in innovation and service, but also in how we value and support our employees." As the family made their way back inside after the press conference, they were buoyed by a sense of optimism. But the real work was just beginning. Implementing such sweeping changes would be a challenge, and they knew there would be resistance from some quarters. Later that evening, as they gathered for a family dinner to celebrate the day's successes, the conversation turned to the future. Emma, inspired by Olivia's rise and the company's new direction, spoke up. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "What if we started a mentorship program, connecting our executives with students from underprivileged backgrounds? It could be a way to give back and maybe find future talent for the company." The table fell silent for a moment, then erupted in a chorus of enthusiasm. It was exactly the kind of innovative, socially conscious thinking that embodied the new spirit of Blackwood Transportation. As the night wore on and plans were made, Olivia found herself on the balcony, looking out over the city. She felt a presence beside her and turned to see Thomas. "Quite a day," he said, leaning on the railing next to her. Olivia nodded, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. "It's all happening so fast," she admitted. "Sometimes I wake up and can't believe this is my life now." Thomas was quiet for a moment before speaking. "You know, when I first found out about you, I was angry, scared. I thought you were going to take everything away from me." Olivia turned to him, surprised by his candor. Thomas continued, "But now, I can't imagine doing all this without you. You've brought something to this family, to this company, that we were missing, a perspective we needed." Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes as she listened to her brother's words. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." As they stood there, looking out over the city they were working to change, both siblings felt a sense of purpose and belonging. They had faced adversity, overcome challenges, and emerged stronger, and they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, as family, as colleagues, as friends. Inside, Alexander watched his children from the living room window, a sense of pride and contentment washing over him. The path that had led them here had been fraught with difficulties, but seeing his family united, working towards a common goal, made it all worthwhile. As the night drew to a close and the family began to disperse, there was a sense of anticipation in the air. They stood on the brink of a new chapter, not just for Blackwood Transportation, but for all of them. The future was uncertain, but filled with promise, and they would meet it head-on together. The autumn leaves were turning golden outside the windows of Blackwood Transportation's headquarters as Olivia sat in her new office, poring over the latest reports from the Employee Relations Department. 6 months had passed since the tumultuous events that had reshaped the company and her life, and she was still adjusting to her role as Director of Employee Relations and Corporate Social Responsibility. A knock on the door interrupted her concentration. "Come in," she called, looking up to see Thomas entering with a stack of papers. "Hey, sis," he greeted, dropping into the chair across from her desk. "Got a minute to go over the quarterly projections?" Olivia nodded, clearing a space on her cluttered desk. As they dove into the numbers, she marveled at how natural it felt now, working side by side with her brother. The initial awkwardness had given way to a comfortable camaraderie, built on mutual respect and shared goals. "These numbers are impressive," Olivia remarked, scanning the report. "The new initiatives are really making a difference." Thomas nodded, a hint of pride in his voice. "Dad was right to put you in charge of this department. Your perspective has been invaluable." Their conversation was interrupted by a text message on both their phones. It was from Emma. "Family meeting tonight. Mom says it's important." Exchanging curious glances, they wrapped up their work and headed home, both wondering what could be so urgent. At the Blackwood mansion, they found the family gathered in the living room. Alexander and Victoria sat close together on the sofa, their expressions a mix of excitement and nervousness. Emma perched on the arm of a nearby chair, practically vibrating with anticipation. As Olivia and Thomas took their seats, Eleanor emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray of her famous empanadas. The sight and smell of the familiar comfort food brought a smile to Olivia's face. It was these little touches that had helped blend their two worlds, making the mansion feel like home to both Blackwoods and Martinez's. "So," Thomas began, unable to contain his curiosity, "what's this all about?" Alexander cleared his throat, taking Victoria's hand in his. "We have some news," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future of the company and our family." Victoria picked up where he left off. "We've decided it's time for some changes. Alexander is going to be stepping back from his role as CEO." A shocked silence fell over the room. Olivia felt her heart skip a beat. Was this because of her? Had her presence somehow pushed Alexander out? But before she could voice her concerns, Alexander continued. "It's time for new leadership, new ideas. That's why we've decided to propose a co-CEO structure to the board." He paused, looking at Thomas and Olivia in turn. "We want you two to take over as co-CEOs of Blackwood Transportation." The room erupted in exclamations of surprise and excitement. Emma let out a delighted squeal, while Elena clasped her hands to her chest, tears shimmering in her eyes. Thomas and Olivia sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what their parents were proposing. "But are you sure?" Olivia finally managed to ask. "I mean, I've only been with the company for a short time, and Thomas has so much more experience." Alexander held up a hand to stop her. "We're sure. You both bring unique strengths to the table. Thomas, you have the financial acumen and the deep understanding of our operations. Olivia, you bring fresh perspectives, innovative ideas, and a commitment to social responsibility that is reshaping our company culture." Victoria leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Together, you two represent the future of Blackwood Transportation, a future that honors our past while embracing new possibilities." As the initial shock wore off, excitement began to build. Thomas and Olivia found themselves discussing ideas, finishing each other's sentences as they envisioned the future of the company under their leadership. Emma chimed in with suggestions for expanding their mentorship program, while Eleanor offered insights on how to better support the families of their employees. As the night wore on and plans were made, Alexander and Victoria watched their children with pride. This was more than they could have hoped for when the truth about Olivia first came to light. They had not just added a daughter to their family. They had found a way to make their family and their company stronger, more vibrant and more prepared for the future. Later that night, as the excitement began to settle, Olivia found herself on the balcony, gazing out at the city lights. She felt a presence beside her and turned to see Eleanor. "Mija," her mother said softly, "are you happy?" Olivia considered the question, reflecting on the whirlwind journey that had brought her to this moment. "I am, Mom," she replied, realizing the truth of it as she spoke. "It's not the life I ever imagined for myself, but it feels right." Elena wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Your father would be so proud of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not your biological father," she clarified, glancing back towards the house where Alexander's laughter could be heard. "I mean Roberto, the man who raised you." Olivia felt a pang in her heart at the mention of the only father she had known for most of her life. "Do you think he would understand all of this?" Elena nodded, a soft smile on her face. "He always said you were destined for great things. He would be thrilled to see you using your talents to help others, to make a real difference in the world." As they stood there, mother and daughter, Olivia felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had found her place in this new world without losing touch with where she came from. The two parts of her life, once so separate, had merged into something beautiful and powerful. Inside, Thomas was having a similar moment of reflection with Alexander. "Dad," he said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain, "are you sure about this? About me and Olivia running the company?" Alexander placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "I've never been more sure of anything, Thomas. Watching you two work together these past months, seeing how you balance each other out, it's exactly what this company needs." As the family began to disperse for the night, there was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. They stood on the brink of a new chapter, not just for Blackwood Transportation, but for all of them. Olivia and Thomas, once strangers, now partners poised to lead a major corporation. Emma, inspired by her siblings, already dreaming of the ways she could contribute to the family legacy. Elena and Victoria, former rivals turned confidants, united in their love for their blended family. And at the center of it all, Alexander Blackwood, the man whose past decisions had set this all in motion. As he looked around at the family he had built, not just by blood but by choice and circumstance, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges. Leading a company as co-CEOs would test Thomas and Olivia's newfound bond. Balancing family dynamics with professional responsibilities would require constant effort from all of them. But as they said their goodnights, hugs lasting a little longer than usual, there was a shared understanding. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced every challenge so far, together as a family united by love, respect, and a shared vision for the future. As Olivia drifted off to sleep that night, her mind swirling with plans and possibilities, she felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. She was a Blackwood and a Martinez, a taxi driver turned executive, a sister and a daughter. And tomorrow, she would wake up ready to take on the world with her family by her side. The future was bright, full of promise and potential. And for the Blackwood Martinez family, it was just beginning. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Blackwood Transportation's executive floor, casting a warm glow over the newly remodeled office. Olivia stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, taking in the view of the city she now helped lead. Beside her, Thomas adjusted his tie, a mixture of excitement and nervousness evident in his demeanor. "Ready for this?" Olivia asked, turning to her brother with a smile. Thomas nodded, his expression determined. "As ready as we'll ever be. Let's do this." Today marked their first official day as co-CEOs of Blackwood Transportation. The board had unanimously approved Alexander's proposal, recognizing the unique strengths the siblings brought to the table. Now, it was time to put their vision into action. As they made their way to the conference room for their first executive meeting, Olivia couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. From strangers to siblings, from adversaries to partners, their relationship had evolved in ways she never could have imagined. The conference room fell silent as they entered, all eyes turning to the new leadership. Olivia felt a momentary flutter of nerves, but as she met Thomas's steady gaze, she found her confidence. "Good morning, everyone," Thomas began, his voice clear and assured. "As you know, today marks the beginning of a new era for Blackwood Transportation." Olivia picked up seamlessly where he left off. "We're here to build on the strong foundation my father, our father, has created, while also charting a course for the future. A future that prioritizes innovation, sustainability, and social responsibility." As they outlined their vision for the company, Olivia could see the mix of reactions around the table. Some executives nodded enthusiastically, while others looked more skeptical. She knew they had their work cut out for them, proving that this unconventional leadership structure could succeed. But as the meeting progressed, it became clear that Thomas and Olivia's different perspectives and skills complemented each other perfectly. Where Thomas brought deep industry knowledge and financial acumen, Olivia offered fresh ideas and a keen understanding of employee needs. Together, they painted a compelling picture of Blackwood Transportation's future. As the executives filed out at the end of the meeting, many stopping to offer congratulations and support, Olivia felt a surge of pride. They were off to a strong start. Later that afternoon, as Olivia was reviewing proposals for expanding their green transportation initiative, a familiar face appeared at her door. "Marco?" she exclaimed, surprised to see her old friend from her taxi driving days. "What are you doing here?" Marco shuffled in, looking slightly out of place in the corporate environment. "Hey, Liv, I saw the news about your promotion. Thought I'd come congratulate you in person." Olivia rose to embrace her friend, touched by the gesture. "Thanks, Marco. That means a lot." As they chatted, catching up on old times, Olivia couldn't help but notice the wistful look in Marco's eyes. "Is everything okay?" she asked gently. Marco sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's just seeing you here, in this big office, running this huge company. It's amazing, Liv, but I can't help feeling like we're worlds apart now." Olivia felt a pang of guilt. In the whirlwind of recent events, she had admittedly lost touch with some of her old friends. "Marco, you're still important to me. You're a part of who I am, where I came from. That hasn't changed." A thought struck her suddenly. "Actually, I have an idea. We've been looking to revamp our driver training program. Your experience would be invaluable. Would you be interested in consulting on the project?" Marco's eyes widened in surprise. "Me? Consult for Blackwood Transportation? Are you serious?" Olivia nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. We need people who understand the realities of the job, who can help us create programs that really make a difference for our drivers." As they discussed the possibilities, Olivia felt a sense of things coming full circle. She wasn't just building a new life. She was finding ways to bring her two worlds together, to use her new position to uplift the community she came from. That evening, as the Blackwood Martinez family gathered for dinner to celebrate Thomas and Olivia's first day as co-CEOs, there was a palpable sense of excitement in the air. Emma regaled them with stories from her college classes, where she was studying business with a focus on corporate social responsibility, inspired by Olivia's work. Helena and Victoria exchanged recipes and gossip, their friendship having blossomed over the past months. Alexander, sitting at the head of the table, looked around with a mixture of pride and contentment. "I proposed a toast," he said, raising his glass, "to family, to new beginnings, and to the bright future of Blackwood Transportation." As they clinked glasses, Olivia felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This was her family, not just by blood, but by choice, by shared experiences, by love. Later, as they relaxed in the living room, Thomas turned to Olivia with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about our name." Olivia raised an eyebrow, curious. "What about it?" "Well," Thomas continued, "we're leading this company together, and it's not just about the Blackwood legacy anymore. It's about the future we're building, a future that includes both sides of our family." Understanding dawned on Olivia's face. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" Thomas nodded, a smile playing at his lips. "What do you think about proposing a name change to the board, from Blackwood Transportation to Blackwood Martinez Transportation?" The room fell silent for a moment, all eyes turning to Alexander. He sat back, considering the idea, then slowly began to nod. "It has a nice ring to it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A name that truly represents who we are now." As the family discussed the idea, each offering their thoughts and suggestions, Olivia felt a sense of completion she had never known before. This was more than she could have ever dreamed of when she first learned the truth about her parentage. She had not just found her biological father, she had gained a whole new family, a new purpose, a new identity that honored both sides of her heritage. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges. Leading a major corporation as co-CEOs was uncharted territory. Balancing family dynamics with professional responsibilities would require constant effort and communication. And there would always be those who doubted them, who waited for them to fail. But as Olivia looked around at her family, Thomas engrossed in a playful debate with Emma about business ethics, Elena and Victoria planning their next community outreach event. Alexander watching it all with a contented smile, she knew they could handle whatever came their way. They had weathered storms, overcome obstacles, and emerged stronger. They had learned to blend two worlds, to find strength in their differences, to build something greater than the sum of its parts. As the night wore on and plans for the future were made, Olivia found herself on the balcony once again, gazing out at the city lights. She felt a presence beside her and turned to see Alexander. "Quite a view, isn't it?" he said, his voice soft with reflection. Olivia nodded, leaning into her father's side. "It's beautiful, and a little overwhelming, knowing we're responsible for so many people's livelihoods." Alexander put an arm around her shoulders. "You'll do great, both of you. You've already proven that you can handle anything life throws at you." As they stood there, father and daughter, Olivia felt a profound sense of peace. The journey that had brought them here had been filled with twists and turns, with moments of joy and heartbreak. But standing here now, looking out over the city they would help shape, Olivia knew that every step had been worth it. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities and promise. And whatever it held, the Blackwood-Martinez family would face it together, united by love, strengthened by adversity, and driven by a shared vision of a better tomorrow. The boardroom of Blackwood-Martinez Transportation hummed with tension as Olivia and Thomas faced their most significant challenge yet as co-CEOs. 6 months into their tenure, they were presenting a bold new initiative, a complete overhaul of the company's fleet to transition to electric vehicles. "The initial investment is substantial," Thomas acknowledged, his voice steady as he addressed the board members. "But our projections show that within 5 years, we'll not only recoup the costs but significantly increase our profit margins." Olivia stepped forward, building on her brother's point. "More importantly, this move positions us as industry leaders in sustainability. It aligns with our corporate values and opens up new market opportunities." As they fielded questions from the board, Olivia couldn't help but notice the skeptical glances exchanged between some of the older members. Despite their successes so far, there were still those who doubted the wisdom of having two young co-CEOs, especially ones related by blood. After a grueling 2-hour session, the board finally approved the initiative, though not without some dissenting votes. As Olivia and Thomas left the boardroom, both felt the weight of the decision they had just pushed through. "That was close," Thomas muttered, loosening his tie. Olivia nodded, her mind already racing with the next steps they needed to take. "But we did it. Now the real work begins." As they made their way back to their offices, they were intercepted by Sarah, their longtime assistant. "Olivia, Thomas," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "There's a situation developing at one of the warehouses. The workers are threatening to strike over the new shift schedules." Olivia and Thomas exchanged a look of concern. This was exactly the kind of situation they had hoped to avoid with their employee-focused policies. "I'll handle it," Olivia said decisively. "Thomas, can you start reaching out to our contacts about the fleet transition?" Thomas nodded, and they parted ways, each tackling a different aspect of their growing challenges. Hours later, Olivia returned to the office, exhausted but satisfied. She had managed to negotiate a compromise with the warehouse workers, averting the strike. As she slumped into her chair, Thomas entered, looking equally worn out. "How did it go?" he asked, perching on the edge of her desk. Olivia sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Resolved for now, but it made me realize we need to revisit our communication strategies with the ground-level employees. How about you?" Thomas grimaced slightly. "Mixed results. Some of our partners are excited about the electric fleet, others are hesitant. We've got our work cut out for us." As they discussed their next moves, a knock on the door interrupted them. It was Emma, looking uncharacteristically serious. "Hey sis," Olivia greeted, noticing her sister's expression. "Everything okay?" Emma took a deep breath before speaking. I've been offered an internship with our main competitor." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Thomas was the first to break it. "That's quite an opportunity," he said carefully. Olivia studied her younger sister's face, seeing the conflict there. "But you're not sure if you should take it," she surmised. Emma nodded, sinking into a chair. "I want to make my own way, you know. Not just be the Blackwood Martinez heiress, this could be a chance to prove myself outside of the family business, but I don't want you to think I'm betraying the company. Olivia and Thomas exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between them. It was Thomas who spoke first. "Emma," he said gently, "you need to do what's right for you. We'll support you no matter what." Olivia nodded in agreement. This company, this legacy, it's not a cage. It's a foundation for all of us to build our own lives, our own dreams. Emma's eyes filled with tears of relief. "You really mean that?" "Of course we do," Olivia assured her, pulling her into a hug. "We're family first, business second, always." As Emma left, visibly lighter, Olivia and Thomas found themselves reflecting on their own journey. They had come so far from the days of suspicion and resentment, learning to support each other unconditionally. That evening, as the extended Blackwood Martinez family gathered for their weekly dinner, the atmosphere was charged with the day's events. Alexander and Victoria listened intently as Olivia and Thomas recounted the challenges they had faced. "I'm proud of you both," Alexander said, his voice warm with approval. "You're facing these obstacles head-on, together. That's exactly what I hoped for when I proposed the co-CEO structure." Eleanor, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "But are you taking care of yourselves, mijos? All this stress, these long hours, it's a lot to handle." Victoria nodded in agreement. "Your mother's right. You need to make sure you're not burning out." Olivia and Thomas exchanged a guilty look. They had been so focused on proving themselves, on living up to the legacy they had inherited, that they had been pushing themselves to the limit. "You're right," Olivia admitted. "We need to find a better balance." As the conversation flowed, touching on Emma's internship opportunity and the company's new initiatives, Olivia felt a deep sense of gratitude. Despite the challenges they faced, they had this, a family that supported each other, that wasn't afraid to offer both praise and constructive criticism. Later that night, as Olivia stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out over the city, she reflected on how far they had come. The company was growing, evolving in ways that aligned with their values. Their family, once fractured by secrets and misunderstandings, was now stronger than ever, but she also recognized the truth in her mother's words. The path they had chosen was demanding, and they needed to find ways to sustain themselves for the long haul. As she turned to go back inside, her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Thinking we should schedule that vacation we've been putting off. What do you say?" Olivia smiled, typing back a quick reply. "Absolutely. It's time we practiced what we preach about work-life balance." As she got ready for bed, Olivia felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, there were challenges ahead. The road they had chosen wasn't an easy one, but with their family behind them and each other by their side, she knew they could handle whatever came their way. The Blackwood Martinez legacy was still being written, and Olivia was determined to ensure it was a story of success, integrity, and most importantly, of family. As she drifted off to sleep, her mind was already working on new ideas, new ways to grow both the company and their family bonds. The journey continued, with all its ups and downs, and Olivia wouldn't have it any other way. The sun was setting over the city skyline as Olivia stood at the podium, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Before her, a sea of faces, employees, partners, media, and family, waited in anticipation. This was the moment they had been working towards for months. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice strong and clear, "today marks a new chapter in the history of our company. I am proud to announce that Blackwood Martinez Transportation is launching its fully electric fleet, setting a new standard for sustainability in our industry." A round of applause erupted from the audience. Olivia caught Thomas's eye from where he stood at the side of the stage, and they shared a smile of triumph. This was their vision coming to life. As Olivia continued her speech, detailing the environmental impact and innovative technology behind their new fleet, she couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, doubters, and moments of uncertainty, but they had persevered, driven by their shared commitment to making a positive change in the world. After the presentation, as the crowd mingled and explored the sleek new vehicles on display, Olivia found herself surrounded by her family. Emma, home from her internship with the competitor, hugged her tightly. "This is amazing, Liv," she gushed. "You and Thomas have really done it." Alexander placed a hand on Olivia's shoulder, his eyes shining with pride. "You've taken this company further than I ever imagined," he said softly. "You've honored the Blackwood legacy while creating something entirely new." Eleanor, standing nearby, added her own words of praise. "And you've never forgotten where you came from, Mija. You've used your position to lift up others. That's what matters most." As Olivia basked in the warmth of her family's support, she spotted a familiar face in the crowd. It was Marco, looking slightly out of place in his suit but beaming with pride. "Marco," she called out, waving him over. "I'm so glad you could make it." Marco embraced her, his grin wide. "Wouldn't have missed it for the world, Liv. The driver training program you put me in charge of, it's been a game changer. The guys are actually excited about these new electric rigs." Olivia felt a surge of satisfaction. This was what it was all about. Not just innovating for innovation's sake, but making real, positive changes in people's lives. As the evening wore on, Olivia found a quiet moment with Thomas. They stood together, watching as their employees and families mingled, the excitement of the launch still palpable in the air. "We did it, bro," Olivia said, bumping his shoulder with hers. Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We did, but it's just the beginning, isn't it? There's so much more we can do." Olivia understood exactly what he meant. The electric fleet was a huge step, but it was just one part of their larger vision for the company. They had plans for expanding their social responsibility initiatives, for pushing the boundaries of sustainable transportation even further. "You know," Thomas continued, "I've been thinking about Dad's old dream, the one about expanding internationally." Olivia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on. What if we took this model global? Not just shipping and logistics, but setting up sustainable transportation networks in developing countries. We could make a real difference on a global scale." As they discussed the possibilities, Olivia felt that familiar spark of excitement. This was why they worked so well together. Thomas's strategic thinking combined with her innovative spirit. Together, they could dream big, and then figure out how to make those dreams a reality. Later that night, as the family gathered at the Blackwood mansion for a private celebration, Olivia found herself on the balcony, looking out over the city. The lights of their new electric vehicles twinkled on the streets below, a visible sign of the change they were bringing to the world. She felt a presence beside her and turned to see Victoria joining her. "Quite a view, isn't it?" Victoria said, echoing words Alexander had spoken to Olivia not so long ago. Olivia nodded, smiling. "It's amazing. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life." Victoria placed a gentle hand on Olivia's arm. "You know, when I first learned about you, I was scared. I thought you might destroy everything we had built." Olivia tensed slightly, but Victoria continued, her voice warm. "But you didn't destroy anything. You made it better, stronger. You completed our family in ways I never could have imagined." Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes as she hugged Victoria. "Thank you," she whispered, "for accepting me, for being the mother I never knew I needed." As they rejoined the others inside, Olivia looked around at her family. Alexander and Eleanor, once estranged, now chatting amicably about community outreach programs. Emma, excitedly sharing stories from her internship with Thomas. This was her world now, a beautiful blend of past and present, of Blackwood and Martinez. As the night wound down, Alexander called for everyone's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, raising his glass. "To Olivia and Thomas, for leading this company into a bright new future. To Emma, for forging her own path while staying true to our family values. And to all of us, for proving that family is about love, not just blood." As they clinked glasses, Olivia felt a profound sense of belonging. She had found her place in this world, bridging two families, two legacies. And together, they were building something truly remarkable. The journey ahead was full of possibilities, new challenges to face, new horizons to explore. But Olivia knew that with her family by her side, there was nothing they couldn't accomplish. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Olivia's dreams were filled with images of a future bright with promise, a future where the Blackwood Martinez name was synonymous not just with success, but with positive change and family values. The road had been long and sometimes difficult, but every step had led her here, to a place of love, purpose, and endless potential. And as the first light of dawn broke over the city, Olivia Blackwood Martinez was ready to face whatever new adventures awaited her and her family. The story of the Blackwood Martinez family was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning. And Olivia couldn't wait to see what the next chapter would bring.